Sir Joe, we heard some comments from the Spanish Foreign Minister in recent days which appeared to contradict some of what you yourself and the Chief Minister Fabian Picardo had said about the agreement in principle. Do you think that that was her protecting herself from criticisms from right-wing politicians, or do you think it was more than that?
I think it was her protecting herself, but that it's not just that. That is to say, I think there's an element, given that there are people who are, fuming at what they see a failure to do what Margallo said. I mean, remember, Margallo, almost within 24 hours of the result, said this is the best opportunity in 300 years. And the getting of the veto for the transition period and the getting of the veto for the final result was seen by the Partido Popular and other people to the right of the Partido Popular as a mechanism in order to blackmail us into doing a deal on shared sovereignty, right? So she's being attacked by people for having given up this golden opportunity. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they don't know us well enough, and they have not taken the message from two referenda that they may succeed in hurting us and they may succeed in blackmailing us, but they will never succeed in us capitulating to blackmail.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that González Laya has said, which I think perhaps contradicts some of what you have said, is the way that you interpret what Gibraltar has agreed so far in this agreement in principle, is the control of people coming into Gibraltar. Frontex, the European Borders and Coastguard Agency, will report to Spain because Spain is a member of the Schengen community, but Gibraltarians will not have to go through a Frontex check before returning to Gibraltar. Is that still your understanding?
Look, it's not only my understanding, it's something that I think would make me think twice about this deal if it wasn't there. I mean, it's self-evident that nobody that is living in any of the 27 countries is going to have to be checked for somebody to decide if he's going to be allowed to go in. That is to say, it's inconceivable that Italians would check Italians to see whether they would be allowed into Italy, or Spaniards would check Spaniards to see whether they're allowed into Spain. Look, if you're not allowed into your own country, where are you going to be allowed?
But
so, by definition...
Not even for the purposes of checking criminal records, for example?
No, not even for the purpose of... we have to deal with our own criminals. Mm-hmm. I mean, what do? If somebody has a criminal record, leaves Gibraltar, then you don't allow him to come back. If Schengen was operating like that, then it would be a haven of non-criminality. They would have exported all their crimes to the rest of the planet. So the logic of the position is, as I've understood it from the explanations that we've had from Fabian when he's come back from the negotiations, is that the Frontex scrutiny would be limited to a very small proportion of the passengers. Those are the words he's used when explaining it. Mm-hmm. The proportion of the passengers who do not have a right to be in Schengen. The passengers that arrive from the United Kingdom, who are residents of Gibraltar, as I've told you before, independent of nationality, of any nationality. Anybody who's got a residence permit or who's got a right of residence by birth to be in Gibraltar gets off the plane and goes through the airport, as far as I'm concerned, as it's doing today, as if there was no Schengen Agreement. Okay? I would envisage that the way you would do this is that just like when you go to the United Kingdom, you go to Heathrow or Gatwick, there is a EU, EEA British citizen, at least until the end of the year there was, right? I imagine today it says British and non-British. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But before it said EEA and non-EEA. And we would have one that would say Schengen and non-Schengen. So if you're Schengen, you just walk in without any further controls. If we had, for example, a demand for flights from Madrid, right? Then what would happen would be that you would be able to fly to Madrid without any passport check at either end, because you're already in Schengen. If you came from London and you were going to get a connecting flight to Madrid, then you would just go from one airport, from one plane to the other, and then you would be entering the Schengen area in Madrid. So the logic of the situation is that the people who need to be checked, which we cannot do, the reason why we need to have Frontex is because we are not prepared to have a Spanish presence. And the reason why it has to be either Frontex or Spain is because we are not able to have access to the data that Frontex has.
Why not? Because we're not a sovereign state under
Well,
international law.
Well, first of all, because we are not a sovereign state. As far as I'm concerned, this is not, which is something, again, that has to be cleared up, because I think the Spanish Foreign Secretary has talked about us belonging to Schengen and Spain, representing as well. As far as I'm concerned, this is not what we're doing. We're doing an agreement with Schengen, which gives us access to the Schengen territory. But we're not members of Schengen. Because if we were members of Schengen, then we should be on an equal footing with everybody else, and we wouldn't need Frontex.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay.
The United Kingdom cannot do it because the United Kingdom is not entitled to have access to the data, which is the data of millions of people with their criminal records and everything else about them, mm-hmm. which they will not have. So when we stop people whom we don't know when they arrive here, mm-hmm. what we check them is whether there is an Interpol warning or a UK warning. Mm-hmm. But we don't have, if there is a Schengen record that is not also an Interpol record and so on. Sure. So in effect, what Frontex would do is something that is of benefit to Gibraltar in one sense, that if Frontex was not there, there might be people who are coming into Gibraltar who have had no criminality recorded by Interpol or by the United Kingdom, but might have it recorded by the Schengen system, which we would know nothing about, and we would let them in. Mm-hmm. So the need for Frontex is to make sure that people who would not be able to get into the Schengen area through any one of the 27 countries don't find that there is a weak link in the system and use Gibraltar for that.
Sure.
And we would not particularly want to be the entry of criminal elements into the Schengen area.
For obvious reasons.
So there is no conflict of interest in that. Yeah. And therefore, since that is the only justification for this, there is absolutely no need why we should have to be given explanations to anybody from any place other than our own borders and coastguards when we come in.
So Frontex would be present in Gibraltar. Frontex would report to Spain, but there would. You don't
I think reporting to Spain perhaps is again
a misnomer.
Is making it seem that Spain has a control that she doesn't have.
Yeah.
In effect, there is a terminal
mm-hmm.
which has access to a massive database. We are not allowed to touch that terminal. Mm-hmm. Frontex is not supposed to touch a terminal. The 27 countries have 27 terminals, let's say. Mm-hmm. Well, we had one for each country. It's more mm-hmm. complicated than that. There's one in each airport mm-hmm. or in each entry point. Mm-hmm. But let's say that there is the Spanish terminal entry. There isn't a Gibraltar terminal entry. So the the connection would be from the terminal that is located in Spain to the central terminal that we understand is in Poland. And therefore there would be a request for clearance coming from Spain, but not because Spain has control over Gibraltar, because they are the only ones who can make the request. It's as simple as that, and nothing more than that. And if it tries to be converted into something more than that, then of course, I said to you before, we'll see what the final deal looks like. If it is as I understand it, I don't think anybody in Gibraltar could possibly be concerned or worried or object.
No.
If it's not, then
You won't sign it.
we'll have to see.
Okay. This is the point I wanted to sort of raise with you. You've always been a champion of British sovereignty, of Gibraltarians determining their own political futures, self-determination. You've said that negotiating for a deal is effectively with the EU. Spain has to approve, but it would be a UK-EU treaty. But of course it is a negotiation first and foremost with Spain, and that I think has got some people a little bit concerned. And I suppose my question to you is, has it been at all difficult for you, who I think you're seen as the hawkish a member of Parliament and government minister, or the most hawkish on the Spanish issue? Has it been difficult to reconcile that with the need, if you like, because of the Brexit vote, to negotiate a new relationship with Spain?
Look, I am the most hawkish on that and on quite a few other issues, right? Because I'm very clear, and it's not that I am incapable of being persuaded. But when I make my mind, is not an easy thing to make me change, right? I don't think this is a new relationship with Spain, and I don't think this is a new status for Gibraltar. I think this is something that gives us access to Schengen as the only way that we can retain fluidity at the frontier. Now, fluidity at the frontier is important because the frontier is not going to disappear. The fence is not going to come down. There is just that if you are not having to ask people to show their passport to go into La Linea, it's because you ask them to show their passport when they entered Gibraltar, and you don't need to ask them again. But they've had already to show their passport at the La Linea border to come into Gibraltar, because there are people who were visitors who did not have a right to live in Gibraltar. The people who have a right to live in Gibraltar don't need to go every day to show their border to Frontex, to go to the border to show Frontex their passport, because they don't need to go to show their passport, and they can go in and out as many times a day as they want. So you need to understand that the only thing that is really happening is that if somebody was already in Gibraltar, there would be no border guard for him to show the passport to. So therefore, he has to show the passport to the border guard that he would show it to when he comes into Gib.
At the airport, at the port?
At the airport, or at the port. Mm-hmm. And then once it's shown that and been accepted, it means he can go in and out of Spain as many times as he wants, even though he's not a resident of Gibraltar, right? But of course, from the moment that he shows the passport to the guy from Spain that is in effect monitoring the Schengen rules, which we are not going to monitor, that from there he gets a stamp, and if he spends 89 days in Gibraltar and goes one day to La Linea, that's the 90 days of Schengen used up. So the effect of the non-resident being required to go through that procedure is in fact so that the days that he spends in Gibraltar will count against the 90 days that he's allowed to have in the 27 countries. In effect,
in every 180, no? 90 and 180?
That's right. But if you use the 90 in one go, then for 90 days you have to go, right? But if you just think of what I've told you and how I've explained it, de facto, they're treating us as the 28th state. Because the time you spent in Gibraltar, you're not in one of the 27 states, but it counts as if you were in one of the 27 states. So it's almost like the 30th member state that I came up with when there were 12.
Okay, so Joe, if I can, you mentioned the Spanish chap checking the Schengen system. Is that in Gibraltar or is that on the La Linea side of the Gibraltar airport? No,
there is going to be a building that will straddle by a few meters so that our people enter through the Gibraltar door and the passenger will be escorted by a Borders and Coastguards guy to that place because we are expecting that maybe 10 or 15% of the airline, of the aircraft will need to go down that route. You know, if it was the entire passenger list, you would then have, everybody being trooped down there. It's not going to happen. I mean, the way it's explained to me is the Border and Coastguards guy takes the few individuals that need to be checked down to where the joint thing is. In that joint cabin that's going to be there will be a Frontex presence, a Borders and Coastguards presence, and a Spanish presence to stamp the passport. We're not going to stamp passports, and we cannot put it in the machine to check it because the machine will be on the Spanish side.
So then your red line of no Spanish law enforcement in Gibraltar is not crossed in that scenario?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the final...
Look, remember that what I found objectionable in the Cordoba Agreement airport use was that if you wanted to board a plane going to Madrid, you had to get clearance from a Spaniard to board the plane. You couldn't go into the plane without the permission of the Spaniard. And you were treated as already being in Spain before the plane had taken off.
Right, and this is different.
This is different. I mean, this is about being treated when you enter Gibraltar as if Gibraltar was the 28th Schengen state and therefore no longer requiring scrutiny from anybody in the other 27 that will accept the legitimacy of your presence, and the days here will count as if it was days spent in one of the other 27. We cannot do that, and the UK cannot do that. So it necessarily has to be Spain doing it as the nearest state where the entry Schengen would be happening if this agreement was not available. If this agreement was not available, then in effect the same thing would have to happen, but it would have to happen not just to the newcomers who come on the plane, but to every single one of us every time we went into La Linea.
Sure.
So in essence, the control that is going to be limited to visitors would apply to all of us without a deal.
Okay. And finally, Sir Joe, you talked about the potential, you talked about frontier fluidity. The customs union is being discussed as a potential, Gibraltar potentially coming into play further down the road. You have said that you are against the idea of Gibraltar joining the customs union. Sir Peter Caruana said a few days ago that he thought if you don't join the customs union, then Gibraltar would still be at the whim of the Spanish government at the frontier because the Spanish customs officers could create tailbacks and queues by virtue of the fact that they'd need to check, or they could say they could use customs checks as a reason for creating those queues.
Well, clearly he trusts them less than I do. which is odd. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we're talking about people who are now reformed and whom we think we can trust to keep their word when we do things, and therefore we would expect them to do the customs checks that they need to do, which would be no different from the customs checks they have been doing since the frontier opened, because we have never been in the customs union. So whatever customs checks are being done now will continue to be done, right? And that is not creating an insurmountable obstacle. So I don't see why it should get worse. I mean, if we are saying, look, the Spanish want to do an agreement to have fluidity in the frontier, so they do away the need for us to have a passport, but they don't want it to work, so we're going to screw it up by being tougher on the movement of goods than they have been since they joined in 1986. I think that is an argument that can only be used by people who would want to see that happening and need to find an excuse for it. And I don't think that it's a good thing for Gibraltar. I don't think it's a good thing economically. And politically, I would not want to be involved in anything that is subject to laws that are agreed in the European Union without representation. You know, this goes to the very heart of the American War of Independence. No taxation without representation. So if you're going to have a situation where we're going to be entering into an agreement on goods, the only way you can have free movement of goods between us and Spain is that if the goods, when they enter Gibraltar, pay the same duty that they would when they enter Spain. Mm-hmm. Because if they came here with less duty and there was no control, then of course we could make a fortune by channeling all the imports of Spain through Gibraltar. Mm-hmm. That's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. Right? But it also means that if the European Union members and the European Parliament, for which we know can no longer vote, were to decide to raise the level of duty on a particular commodity, then we would have to put that duty on that commodity in Gibraltar, because if we didn't, it would be an unfair competitive advantage, which is against another bit of the European legislation. But we would then be in a situation where we would be imposing taxation, because, you know, import duty is a tax. Mm-hmm. And that taxation would not be a taxation approved by the Parliament, democratically elected by the people of Gibraltar. It would be a decision taken by people in the European Parliament, where we would not be represented. And it also gives a weapon to Spain to decide to try and persuade the rest of the European Union to put duty on things which might be economically beneficial to Gibraltar, but less important to anybody else than it is to us. So, you know, if you're talking about the trouble that they can cause at the frontier, if you think that they're capable of causing trouble at the frontier, imagine the trouble they could cause if they were capable of influencing legislation on import duty in a way that would be detrimental to Gibraltar.
Okay, you happy to leave there, Sir Joe? I take this opportunity to wish you all the best for 2021.
You too, my friend. You too.